final Recession Rebellion session of this week. I think I said that all right, didn't I? But good to see you all as ever here on this quite bright and cold Thursday morning. So, as we always say, these sessions, Recession Rebellion, are really just short, sharp sessions. Get your day off right and start thinking about different things, different aspects of business management, different aspects of personal and organisational psychology, and really anything that feels relevant to one single task, which is to make sure that we don't end up all participating in the forthcoming recession. That's the long and the short of it. We're opting out of the recession, and these sessions are intended to give you tools, techniques, advice, input, stimulus that's going to help you avoid the downturn in effect and help your business prosper through that. So just so you know who you're on with, as ever, my name's Phil. I run a business called Corporate Punk. We're all about helping other businesses to become more responsive, resilient, and innovative. So we've been doing this for a lot of years. We work with a lot of quite well-known people and a lot of smaller businesses as well. So it's always good to see you here. So thank you for making the time. Martin, do you want to say a quick hello?
Yeah, morning everybody. My name's Martin Lucas. So I run Gap in the Matrix. So we use psychology, specifically mathematical psychology, which is the numerical side of thinking, and we use that to create fast and effective revenue growth and also revenue protection, which is a big subject matter for the time at the moment. Thank you, Phil.
Brilliant. So as a treat for Thursday, as always on Thursdays actually, we have Martin going to be talking with us this morning, and I'll come on to that in a second. But just to say, if you have questions or comments, if you want to say nice things or nasty things, stick them in the Zoom group chat. Don't say nasty things. Martin doesn't like it, makes him cry. Stick them in the Zoom chat and we'll pick up on those questions towards the end of the session and read out any comments as well. I think the final thing just to say, these sessions go up on YouTube as well. You can subscribe to the YouTube channel if you search for Recession Rebellion, or indeed just follow Martin and I on LinkedIn. You'll find that we post links to these things so you can always review them later on, and indeed all sharing of this kind of content, both on LinkedIn and any of the social platforms, we really appreciate, because we're trying to help as many people as we possibly can with this initiative. So without further ado, Martin's going to talk with us this morning actually about the psychology of innovation. So over to you, Martin.
Thanks, Phil. So as Phil mentioned, this is what we're going to be talking about this morning, is psychological techniques that power innovation. And I'm going to be walking you through 3 tips. The first tip is very much about yourself and your own thinking. So we've heard this phrase about thinking outside the box, right? It's such a tired, corporate, common business phrase. But what is the actual meaning behind it? Is there any meaning? So from a psychological point of view, the first thing I want you to think about is how you think. When it comes to innovation, we're all conditioned by our environment. So what I mean by that is that, like work, life, culture, rules, KPIs. As an example, if you think about any time that you've moved from one business to another business, you could be doing exactly the same role, same size of organizations that you transfer to, and yet you have to adapt to how they do things. It might be a little bit of behavior change, it might be a little bit of rule change, it might be a different day that your reports are due. Basically, we become very conditioned by the environments that we're in. And that doesn't matter whether that's a good environment or a bad environment, it just conditions us. In the same way that we adapt our behaviors when we're at home, so husbands and wives and partners and all these kind of, whoever you're living with, they start to adapt their behaviors. It's the kind of nurture side of life in motion, right? And the same thing happens in work. So your KPIs, your rules, how your business puts forward its culture, and how conditioned that is, and how you're led and how you lead people, all creates what I call this sphere of natural thinking. So when it comes to innovation, you're already thinking within a sphere of who you are and how you are as an individual. So the first tip for me is to understand that all of us have a thinking base that's natural, that limits our thinking based on the environment that we're in. And that could be, you could have a massive, I'm not talking about growth mindset and fixed mindset, you could be one of the most innovative, wide-thinking people around, but there's still going to be limits about how you think. So what we don't want to do, particularly on a personal level, is think within the box, particularly when we're looking at innovation. So here's the first tip for you, is the more that you can have awareness of self and ask yourself questions about why you're thinking the way that you are, and start exploring different ways to think, the more that you're going to be able to set yourself free about innovation. Because at the end of the day, if you're going to be leading that, or you're just going to be a core part of that innovation team, which is what we're coming on to next, your ability to give yourself permission, and we were talking about this on the Mind Track last week, how important the psychology of permission is for people that you lead. Well, it's just as equally true for you as an individual. You have to give yourself permission to challenge what you're thinking, because every thought that you come up with is generally coming from your past experiences. So it's already within a sphere of limitations. So you only know what you know. So the more that you can question yourself, the better. That's tip one. Tip two is to do with size matters. So what we're talking about here is size of your team. So how big should your team be? Because innovation to me is very deep mind, deep thinking. Phil was talking about that earlier this week, and I thought it seemed to catch on with a lot of people. A lot of questions were about that, about deep work, about deep thinking. It's like, how big should your team be to accomplish innovation? And we believe that it should be teams of 5 or 7. Those numbers come from, we did 2 years of research of looking at how does the brain think in terms of inspiration, in terms of creativity, how can you set it free? And we came up with a number of 5. I've come across 5 or 7 with 2 academic bodies. So one is a university body and the other one is a think tank, and they believe that it's 5 or 7 as well. Part of our logic is that the odd number allows you to have a sense of balance. So there's a majority opportunity within that, obviously 3 versus 2, 4 versus 3. And the other component is that it's not too many people where the most aggressive voice wins. And I'll tell you a little bit more about why that matters. So we've got the permission psychology, because that works based on the individual as well as the group. So you just need enough people so that they hear and understand and are taking part in innovation. So too many people means that you dissipate that permission. It's one of those unconscious tricks. If you tell a group of 15 people that they've all got permission to contribute, it doesn't matter, because the 15th person never gets round to having a point of view, or you're already 3 days into the session of what you're doing. So it dissipates that permission. The other part is that 5 or 7 people gives people enough space to think, which is really key. So it's not a competition, again, of having too many people trying to share their thoughts. So again, you're letting people have that space. You're giving people space to contribute. So a lot of this is about how we think. Because if you think about most of our environments, the thing that I'm always encouraging people to understand about why we feel so short of time is the thing that you've got in the top right of your screen at the moment, whether you're on your phone or your laptop, is time. We're constantly seeing it. So we're constantly being reminded in ways we weren't before the digital age of how little time that we've got. That's the perception that it creates. So we need to make sure that we give people space so that we're not rushing things, because rushing things just creates the shortest answer to something, not the best answer. And that's what will come on to the third tip. But let's just keep going through this. So in the coaching world, they talk about how can you let people be, giving people space to be themselves. And that's what this is all about, is you've just got that nice balance of how you can contribute with teams of that size. And then you've got the who component. So who should actually go into the teams? And this is really, really key. This is one of the biggest innovations that I did within the 4 years of research, of understanding decision-making, of working through all these different components. So he psychology, it's not a male-only domain, but it's more prevalent in the male, as you would expect. So nothing is 100% absolute, right? But what it does mean is it generates this, is that he psychology is very much about practical thinking, it's rational thinking, it's numbers focused, and it lacks emotions. What's the problem with that? Nothing, as long as you balance it. And here's how you balance it. She psychology is more prevalent in the female, but again, not an absolute. And here's what it looks like. So it's more about relationships, it's interconnectivity, it's feelings, and the big one for me is emotional intelligence. So the tip for me is that at least 50% of your problem-solving team, which when you've got 5 or 7 means that you tip it to the majority, should be people that contain she psychology within themselves. And again, as I've said, it's not purely just a female domain. However, I have a strong belief that the world needs more she and the future is more she, and it is more prevalent in women. So it is a good opportunity to bring in women and make sure that you've got that equality and that balance within the team, because emotional intelligence and she psychology is all about connecting dots. That's the skill in a stereotypical way that the female has over the male. So it's good to understand these skills. For me personally, I've got high emotional intelligence when I'm understanding a mass of a marketplace, because that's a lot of what I do. But how individuals feel about me and being able to judge individuals' feelings about stuff is pretty much vacant for me, which is a very, very common male attribute. So for all the work that I do with all of my clients, I live by this. So we look to have at least 50% of our teams to be she psychology, and I look for that within the recruitment and stuff that I do as well. So it's a very, very powerful thing. So that's tip 2, 5 or 7 person teams and at least 50% she psychology. And if you're a man, you'll know within yourself how good your skill is for things like that as well. So it's not just about picking women for the sake of it, in the same way it's not just about picking men for the sake of it, but it is about picking the people that you know that would create balance between that practical side and that interconnected, connecting the dots component of it. That takes us on to the third part, is you need to understand the problem first. So I'll give you an example. So it's vital to be precise and clear about what dots you're trying to connect, right? So you need to investigate the why of the problem. And here's the example. So how can we get young people to thrive in a changing world? I see this type of innovation. We get a lot of problem statements coming into us. It's generally how our business operates. And this is so common and it's so meh. Because most people, if you put them in an innovation situation, they're going to be talking about millennials within 20 seconds, and they're going to be talking about millennials within their own sphere of natural thinking, going back to the first tip. So they're going to be talking about, it'll be like the army campaign, right? Which is one of the worst campaigns I've ever seen. They'll be talking about snowflakes. They'll be talking about low social skills. And it just doesn't make any sense. Instead, if you investigate the problem first before you start doing the how to solve the problem, you can end up with a much more precise brief. And precision really, really matters. And the reason why precision matters is that if you look at this, how can we equip young people to thrive in a world? I'll let you read it for yourselves. If you look at the details that are within that, we've now got 6 or 7 different areas that we can focus on that allows us to explore the whole of the problem and gives us precision for the problem that we're looking to solve. And there's a huge difference between A and B. So my core tip about innovation is don't rush into what you believe the problem is. Explore what the problem is, make it really detailed, make it really precise, and then you've got balance to take to the innovation team to then start working on it. So sorry, I missed the bottom part of that. You can obviously catch it on YouTube and stuff, but I'll just give you a second just to catch up. So that's our tips. So number 1, challenge self to think. So ask questions to push beyond your assumption. We humans, partly because that's how the brain is set up to automate things, make tons of assumptions. And most of the time it's really good for us. When it comes to innovation, it's absolutely not. So you just have to challenge how you think. It doesn't mean that you're wrong about everything. It doesn't mean that how you think is not good. It's just making sure that you push the boundaries, because otherwise you're solving problems within how you think. And that means that you're always going to run into limitations. And even if you're doing that with colleagues, they've got their own limitations because we're all conditioned by the environment. So you just need to make sure that you break free of that. Number 2, teams of 5 or 7, a minimum 50% she psychology, and then examine the problem first. So be precise and it will allow you to connect all of the dots. So that's us, Phil.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So I'll give you a couple of questions from me and then we'll go to the audience. So it's an interesting point, isn't it, about asking questions to challenge our own assumptions. And, you know, certainly I would say in my own work and the work of my team that it's something a lot of people struggle with. So I wanted to ask you if you had any examples of a couple of questions that people could ask to challenge their own thinking. Are there just good question formulations, for example, that people can use?
It's actually, the answer is within the message that we send in the chat, right? So we're giving people permission to ask questions, but we're framing it by saying what, how, why, who, when, where, whatever. So just by putting those into things, it just allows you to have a process that says, rather than just rushing and asking a what question or just one from that list, you ask them all and then you start to examine all aspects of what you're actually looking at. That would be my tip.
Fantastic. And also, I suppose the other question, I always think that innovation is like anything else, really. It's a practice. And, you know, some of these techniques that you've talked about today, particularly around things like asking challenging questions, you're probably going to be bad at them before you're good at them. Do you know what I mean? It's the nature of any sort of practice. Yeah. How would you say to anybody who's trying to think differently about what they're doing and trying new things, how will they know if it's working?
So it's interesting, actually. I know that Adrian Wong's joined us today, and Adrian's life is innovation, and he's done lots of work around that. And the conversations that we've had about it is that he's told me that a lot of the time CIOs or people that work in innovation, they're struggling to prove the value of what they're doing. So I spent a lot of time working on this, that I believe that everything has a mathematical number association with it. So you have to just dig in and say, right, whatever innovation we're coming up with, how can we actually measure this? And I'm talking about real life measurements of it. So it's not just measurement for the sake of it, but it's actually just finding the numerical gains of it. Because if you can track it, you can prove it. If you can prove it, then you'll get more innovation projects to do. You'll get more compliments. It'll help your career. You'll be able to innovate further and further. So I believe there's always a capability to track it. Again, you've just got to ask the right questions about how you explore that.
Fantastic. And I know next week you're going to build on this by talking about how we break free of the habit loop. So talking about practices and habits. Next week, I think your session on breaking free of the habit loop will be really interesting on that. To which point, by the way, on probably Monday, we will be sending out the schedule for the next month's worth of Recession Rebellion sessions. So we're programming 4 weeks ahead at the moment. So expect that on Monday. It'll be out on LinkedIn, so make sure you follow Martin or I. We'll also get it up and out via the Corporate Punk Bulletin as well. So corporatepunk.com/bulletin if you would like to sign up there. Martin, questions from the audience?
Yeah, so the first one is from Dominic. Tell me a story about how you've done this with a client and the output and outcome of it. So great question, Dominic. So I've got a jewelry client at the moment, high growth one, growing 30% year on year. And what we've been looking at from an innovation point of view is helping them look inside, because they've got an amazing aesthetic. They're at the affluent end of the market, but they've not been telling the stories about that. So what we've looked at from an innovation point of view is that the men that they serve are looking for that kind of kids nostalgia, right? So, you know, like when you were a kid, you watched that program that was generally on at 10:30 during the summer that showed you the making of stuff behind the scenes. So we're looking at more of that stuff, because they do collections that are based on aerospace techniques, like using the same metals that go into spaceships and things like that as well, and military design. So we're just helping them understand more of the storytelling to up their drama and connect more into the emotional meaning that the product holds. It's a great example of innovation, because they're a great brand doing a great job. They've got great creativity, but like a lot of organizations, that I guess is a big lifeblood for Phil's business and mine, is that people can't always see the wood for the trees when they're so emotionally connected into something. So that's one story. Number two is one that we're doing with a global fashion brand. And what we've looked at there is returning them back to understanding why people loved them in the first place. So it's what we call the essence of cool. So again, it's coming back to more of the storytelling, but more on the artisan level, which is saying, this is how we make our products, this is how we began, this is why we care. And my overarching answer to your question is that, particularly in this time, for absolutely all of you, whatever your role happens to be, this is the time where consumption is going to lower, and that could be B2B purchasing, not just B2C in general. Consumption is going to come down, certainly during this period and possibly long term as well. And what that means is that when people consume, what they consume is going to carry more meaning to it. It's going to have more of a loyalty component to it. So the more that you can storytell and show how you care, what you care, and just what your products mean to people, and understand that, the more that you're going to win. So hopefully that helps. I think that was it for today, Phil. Oh, sorry, one more just came in. Not a question, more of a supportive comment that these sessions are excellent. I'm just reading that. I'm reading that on the fly. That's great. Well done, Martin, Phil, and the wider Corporate Punk and Gap Matrix team. Excellent and actionable insight. Well done, Richard. You're my best friend. You're my absolute best friend now. That's wonderful. Thank you. I think that's good to end, Phil. So what have we got in stock for us next week? You mentioned it a little bit.
On Tuesday, it's my turn to take the session on Tuesday, and I will be talking about something that I touched on earlier on in a webinar I was doing yesterday, which is how easy it is for people when they're in panic and when they're in fight or flight mode to make choices that actually hobble their businesses in the future. So you know, how do you scale down, being mindful of how to scale up? And I want to give some very practical examples and thought exercises to make sure that as you are thinking through what the next 3 to 6 months look like for your business, you're also thinking through the 6 months, the 12 months, the 18 months beyond that, to make sure that actually you're making the right choices now. So that's going to be Tuesday's session, and I look forward to seeing you all there. In the meantime, as I said earlier on, this session will be up on YouTube. Anything that you can do on LinkedIn to continue to share the value that you're experiencing here. If you are, we really much appreciate that. As I said earlier, we're trying to help as many people as possible. Feel free to subscribe on YouTube at corporatepunk.com/bulletin, or email martin@gapinthematrix.com if you just like the diary invite for these sessions to go straight out to you. So many thanks again for coming. That's been Recession Rebellion for this week, and we'll see you again next.